Lost at sea in a storm in 1841, cast away to a deserted volcanic island, rescued by whalers from America far from home. This 19th century story of a young Japanese fisherman who finds himself the first Japanese living in America, educated in the West, returning to Japan via California gold rush to become samurai to the shogunate and bridge Japan to the Western world after 220 years of seclusion. This man, Nakahama John Manjiro.
It all started right here in Kochi Prefecture, Nakanohama, where a shipwrecked kid from a small fishing village went on to greatly impact Japanese modern history. I have no doubt that the story of John Manjiro, known as Nakahama Manjiro here in Japan, will inspire you. Fate, destiny, and an amazing cross-Pacific adventure.
Only in Japan.
So here we are in Kochi. This is the smallest of the main islands of Japan. On the Pacific side, Shikoku.
Shikoku Island resembles a mini Australia. A short hop from Osaka and Kyoto, Kochi City and Castle dominate the Pacific side, Tosa Shimizu on the southwestern tip being the most remote of the island. It's here that the 14-year-old Manjiro departed for a fishing trip on January 1841, not to return for over a decade. At the John Mung Museum in Tosa Shimizu, you can see his history, a life that inspires people 150 years later, starting with this small wooden fishing boat common in the 1800s. Doi-san, the managing director of the Tosa Shimizu Tourist Association, introduced me to the fateful trip to sea. He left on January 5, 1841, from the town of Usa near Kochi City. Usa looks very much like USA, ironic considering where Manjiro would eventually end up. A couple of days later, on January 7th, about 100 kilometers from Usa near Cape Ashizuri, a storm swept them away. It destroyed their rudder and sail, leaving them helpless on the sea.
And then was dragged 750 kilometers, about 465 miles, to Torishima, out there in the Pacific.
Here's Cape Muroto and the route to the open Pacific, until they were lucky enough to spot an island days later. Had they missed this island, they'd likely have drifted for weeks or months to North America. This island is Torishima, known as Hurricane Island. It has erupted many times since 1841, most recently in 2002, destroying much of the plant life. The island is currently 4 miles, 6.5 kilometers around.
ここでの生活はね、もう本当に143日ですよ。で、かなり長い時間ですね。雨水とかこのアホウドリのおかげなんですけども、他に船も全然通らないですし、もうダメだってね、彼たちは何度ももう死を覚悟したというふうにね、言われていますよね。
Rain didn't fall for one period of 60 to 70 days. Thirst was their biggest challenge. A major earthquake rattled the castaways in April, partially destroying their cave dwelling, but they kept surviving, barely. Then, one day, a miracle. June 27th, 1841. The 5 castaways saw an approaching ship, large Western men rowing towards them. This ship is the John Howland, a whaler from New Bedford, Massachusetts, which had been out at sea since October 31st, 1839, almost 20 months. They were looking for water and food, but they found 5 castaways instead. The John Howland must have been the largest ship Manjiro had ever seen. The 5 certainly were nervous with their fate at the hands of the crew of this foreign ship. And it was fate that the captain was William Whitfield of Fairhaven, a kind man who saw much in Manjiro and his inquisitive mind. The rescued Japanese castaways recovered on board as the John Howland sailed for 6 more months in the Pacific, catching 16 more whales to fill the ships, then headed towards Hawaii. I spoke with Jerry Rooney, president of the Whitfield Manjiro Friendship Society in Fairhaven, about the discovery of the 5 Japanese found on Torishima that day.
The captain went there. He was on a whaling voyage, obviously, and they used to stop at various islands to get provisions. In fact, his logbook says they were looking for kame, they were looking for turtles when they went to that island, Torishima. And obviously, as you know, they found 5 poor desperate people that had been there almost 6 months. So they took them aboard, of course, on the way to Hawaii, where they continued whaling. The captain was so impressed with Manjiro, a young boy who was from a lower level class, if you will, like a peasant. And not only did he not go to school whatsoever, but he had no family last name. He was so impressed with the determination of Manjiro to know what was happening all around him. And when the man at the top of the mast would yell, "There she blows!" he wants to know, what is that? What does it mean? Of course, it was a spouting whale.
Manjiro was just one of those curious about everything kids and made himself useful, picking up English along the way. Now rescued, what was next for them? The John Howland finished 16 months of whaling in the South Pacific with 1,400 barrels of oil arriving into Honolulu Harbor, November 20th, 1841, about 6 months after finding the 5 castaways.
This is Honolulu Harbor, Hawaii. They anchored right here in this harbor, and then from here went on to the United States. His friends did go on the mainland to settle. I could see possibly John Manjiro settling down here in Hawaii, but he didn't want to.
So by the time they got to Hawaii, the captain was so impressed with this young man and felt so badly that he couldn't go to school. So he offered him to come to the USA and go to school for the first time ever. So he stayed on the ship, and the other 4 stayed in Hawaii.
そうですね、その間もですね、当然捕鯨を漁しながらフェアヘイブンまで帰っているんですよね。なので彼はどんどん新しいチャレンジしていく、吸収していく、言葉もそうですし、仕事もそうです。ロープワークとかいうのも全部身につけていってますから、そういった行動を見てやっぱりホイットフィールド船長は自分のね養子縁組をして養子にして自分の子供にして。
It was here that they were finally identified as being Japanese by Dr. Judd, who took care of the castaways on Hawaii. Manjiro was the only one of the 5 to continue to the USA, so they settled in Oahu with Captain Whitfield and Dr. Judd's help.
And because of no Panama Canal, a year and a half later, around South America, in 1843, they arrived in New Bedford.
During that time, the captain gave Manjiro a new name, John, after the ship. Manjiro became part of his surname. Crew called him Johnman, which evolved into his American name, John Mung. New Bedford, Massachusetts, the John Howland was home. Captain Whitfield was from neighboring Fairhaven, a lovely town which would become Manjiro's new home too.
He spent one day in New Bedford reporting to the ship owners and the customs and so forth. And then the following day, May 7th, went to the captain's house at 11 Cherry Street. And that's when he became the first Japanese to live in USA.
Fairhaven was accepting of Manjiro. Captain Whitfield providing for Manjiro room and board, finding him a tutor to start an education. Manjiro was the first Japanese to step foot on continental USA. Many believe the first to ride a train, a steamship, wear a necktie. The Cherry Street home has been completely rebuilt to be as close as the original as possible. I can tell Manjiro would have had a pretty comfortable life here. Let's have a look inside the house. It must have been something for a 16-year-old boy from feudal Japan to live in such an extraordinarily different culture. He went to church, made friends. Education was not something available to him in Japan. Much of his time here was studying. In the home is a copy of the captain's journal documenting the day he met Manjiro. The relationship between Manjiro and Whitfield has ripple effects even today. This day, a light wind from southeast, the isle in sight. At 1 p.m., sent in 2 boats to see if there were any turtles, found 5 poor distressed people on the isle. Took them off, could not understand anything from them. More than that, they were hungry. He didn't know where they were from, how long they'd been there. On this day, Jerry was hosting a group from Tosa in Kochi, Japan. Students and officials from the city. He shows them the same hospitality Whitfield showed Manjiro. The Manjiro Trail takes us past his life in Fairhaven to the old stone school where he studied. Manjiro learned English, math, history, navigation, learned about democracy and Western ideas, played on the front lawn, and was a leader to the younger students. The school is preserved like it was back then, an experience for Japanese students who follow in Manjiro's footsteps. He went on to study shipbuilding and barrel making as a cooper.
And Whitfield House is here, and then the school is way over here. But he would walk to school up the road.
Again, Manjiro wouldn't have received any schooling in Japan. What Manjiro learned here went beyond the knowledge of anyone in Japan at the time about the West. It's a great reminder of how different Japan and the US were in the 19th century. The students from Kochi enjoyed their day here. In May 1846, Manjiro, as John Mung, joined the Franklin. He was registered as a purser, his first voyage without Captain Whitfield. He'd be gone for over 3 years. Sailing around Africa and the Cape of Good Hope to Guam. He visited Ryukyu, now Okinawa. This stop likely played a role in his plan to return to Japan. He heard many stories about Japan's xenophobic policies, something that certainly influenced him when he returned to Japan. More on that soon. He was promoted when the captain left with a mental illness in Manila, and the ship docked in Hawaii where he met his old friends again. Hearing of their failed attempt to return to Japan, Manjiro promised to return soon and make another attempt with them. After 3.5 years, he was back in New Bedford, September 23, 1849, a man of 22.
John Manjiro decided to go home to Japan, where his mother probably thought he was dead. I mean, where had he been for all of these years? He wanted to make sure that she didn't think like that anymore. That trip was not going to be easy, and he needed money. The year was 1849, the gold rush. His next stop, California.
So he took a ship called the Steiglitz out of New Bedford Harbor with an American friend, went around South America, all the way up, stopped in Chile, up to San Francisco, to the gold fields.
The tales of quick riches echoed across the continent. A long trip around South America, the area in gold near Sacramento is where Manjiro would head with a friend from New Bedford. San Francisco, May 1850. They took a steamship to Sacramento and a train, traveled 5 days through rough terrain until they hit the North River and went to work. It was still relatively early in the gold rush. Fortunes were made. In only 4 months, he made $600, more than double his wages on the Franklin. Leaving in September on an 18-day trip to Honolulu. Two of the Japanese castaways joined him aboard his ship, agreeing to take them, the Sarah Boyd. In December, they were off. Crossing half the Pacific, they arrived off the coast of Ryukyu in January. Manjiro had been planning this since he was on the Franklin. Manjiro's plan was to set the dinghy he purchased, called the Adventure, into the water and sail. The Sarah Boyd's captain agreed to wait until they'd reached land before continuing on to China. They reached Odo Beach safely and landed. His landing is marked with a statue. This statue tells the story of Manjiro.
And John Manjiro came ashore at the Otohama coast right here. That statue marks the spot in 1851.
Ryukyu was not Japan, but aligned with the Satsuma clan in Kagoshima. Now, what would happen to them since returners were executed? He spent 7 months in Kagoshima, then transferred to Nagasaki for interrogation. After many months, they were sentenced to 3 days of jail, promised never to leave Japan again, and made to stomp on a Christian artifact to show loyalty. They were now free to return home.
And yes, after 11 years and 10 months, he did return home to Nakanohama to see his mother, who was alive and well.
He walked 5 days to get to Tosashimizu and his village. It's a small fishing village that preserves the history of its famous son. Nakanohama, home sweet home. From above, I got a nice view down to his childhood home. It's hard to miss it. A kayabuki minka, or thatched roof house common of the time. The streets haven't changed much in centuries. We'll go have a look inside with a local leader. This is Eiji Nishikawa, former ward chief of the town. Right away, he showed me the walls, used for sitting to talk with neighbors. Manjiro would have used these. The well from which the family drew water for cooking and drinking. It's the same as 200 years ago when he was born here. The town's paths are mostly unchanged.
This is Manjiroさんが住み寄ったろうという視点で復元したお家。
Kayabuki minka are certainly unique to see today. The house of Manjiro is preserved as close to the way it would have looked back then.
本当はお父さんが駅長とお父さんがカツオを釣る漁師で、それで生計を立てちゃって、だけど万次郎のとこは土地もあって結構裕福な部類やったと思います。そう彼はお兄さんがちょっと体を壊して弱かったので、彼が働き手として小さい頃から苦労して働きよったということもあって。
What happened after he went missing in January of 1841?
お母さんはね、当初やっぱりね、亡くなったことを信じてなかったみたいな。サード以降って言うんやけど、頭のええ子のことを言うんやけど、そういう子やけん、おそらく助かっちゃうって思っちゃったみたいな。で、最初のうちはずっとそういうこともあって、どっかに流れ着いちおいて、なかなかその葬儀を親方の方も出してないので、そういうこともあって、中之浜でもお母さんが墓作ったのはかなり経ってからのことなの。一番最低の
Nishikawa-san took me through the town to the cemetery, a short walk away. The cemetery was up on a hill overlooking the town and sea.
Nakahama.
ほんで市長がです。万次郎さんは。
海も見えます。
で、ここはここの。
It's a good resting place. For his mother, it must have been hard to keep believing he was alive without any word. Manjiro's mother most likely came to this nearby shrine to pray for her lost son. One of the most scenic spots in Japan I know, overlooking the Pacific. The town today is quiet.
村は変わりましたよね。
おそらくね、それほど10年ぐらいでね、劇的には変わってなかったと思う。 でただし万次郎さんが幼い頃ガキ大将やって、遊んだ人とかなんとかはやっぱり多少変わっちゃったけど、お前か今で思い出したみたいなね。それで門弟歓迎会みたいなのがあって、そこでみんなとこう和気あいあい飲むのが、万次郎さん特に飲むのが好きやったので、そういうことでね徐々に思い出して打ち解けたみたいな。
Manjiro was home for just 3 days before being called to Kochi Castle, elevated to rank of samurai to teach Lord Yamanouchi, the Tosa clan daimyo, and other samurai.
Right here around Kochi Castle, John Manjiro taught the samurai English and the ways of the Western world, and his reputation grew. So when that black ship by Commodore Perry came in to Tokyo,
he was called to Edo to consult the shogunate about America and the ways of the Western world. He was now on the side of Japan, in a potential conflict with his adopted country. Manjiro must have had quite a culture shock in the first years back. He also picks a last name, Nakahama, after his village of Nakanohama. This is when his value to Japan becomes quite obvious, although he's not fully trusted. The Black Ship in 1853 consisted of 4 war steamships, the likes never seen before in Japan. The cannon fire could easily destroy Edo, made mostly of wood. Matthew Perry's Black Ship Squadron cruised quickly up the Uraga Channel to Edo Bay with a show of power, firing blanks from the new massive Paishan guns, a show of American naval power. The black-hulled paddle-wheeled USS Susquehanna was the flagship, the likes Japan had never seen before. This is what it really looked like. Shimoda, what will soon become the first US trading port to Japan. In Japanese, they call Perry's squadron Kurofune, thus the name Black Ship. The city even has a Black Ship cruise boat. It's everywhere in town, even the manhole covers.
this is the landing spot of Commodore Perry and the Black Ship. Here in Shimoda, the Black Ship Squadron, Commodore Perry, came to Japan with the goal of opening up the country to trade. That show of force by Commodore Perry really rattled the shogunate, so they called up the only Japanese person that had extensive knowledge of what life was like in America and who could speak perfect English, Nakahama Manjiro, who became a jiki-san, a samurai under the shogun.
After Perry left the first time, Manjiro came to Edo, age 26. Consulting the senior counsel of the shogun, his explanations quite direct about the unfairness of the isolation policy, which gained much trust with the council. His words and observations while abroad left very strong impressions. Perry returned with 9 ships a year later, sailing into Edo Bay. The Japanese would not let him land in Edo, so they settled on Yokohama. The Treaty of Kanagawa was signed in Yokohama, the open spot where it happened, protected today as a reminder of when Japan opened the country again. Commodore Perry and the US got almost all of their demands, and Japan peacefully opened trade to America in Shimoda and Hakodate. But what was Manjiro's role during the meeting?
Well, we hear different stories about that whole meeting, if you will, and that Manjiro was not trusted to directly interpret because he might favor the USA, had been there so long. So, but we understand he was behind a curtain at which he could then confirm the actual translation of what was going on.
The translator was Tatsunosuke Hori, who could speak Dutch at the first meeting in 1853, but was much more fluent in English a year later, but not on the level of Manjiro. Manjiro simply wasn't trusted yet.
So where do you think his heart did lie?
Between the two countries, I think. By that time, you know, he revered the captain as like another father almost, right? And whatever came from being with the captain here. Certainly a very significant part of his developing life.
Manjiro is now based here in Tokyo, called Edo until 1868, translating, teaching English, navigation, and shipbuilding in the service of the Shogun, with whom he had to build trust.
The Kanrin Maru, purchased from the Dutch, was the first Japanese war steamship that was on a mission in 1860.
Manjiro became part of the first Japanese diplomatic mission across the Pacific to establish an embassy in the United States as translator. But when the Kanrin Maru encountered a storm on the Pacific, the entire crew got sick, including the captain, so he had to take over, navigating safely to San Francisco, one of the many legends of John Manjiro.
Here are the samurai in America, safe, thanks to Manjiro's seamanship.
For the next 30 years, he will bridge Japan with the West, which is now part of his long-lasting legacy.
The Manjiro Festival is held annually in Fairhaven and Tosa Shimizu, Kochi.
This year, here in Fairhaven, but because of the threat of rain, it's held inside.
Local leaders from the towns and the Whitfield and Nakahama families often speak, showing the strong connection made generations ago. This is Scott Whitfield, 6th generation.
We can forge lasting bonds. We can create relationships now that will last a lifetime and become a base.
Japanese and American culture exchanges are important here. A chance to talk with artists and creators. But it's the music that I really love. Taiko performances throughout the day.
Notice in the way he's dressed, you can see it more clearly.
Martial arts and traditional Japanese games. Origami. And testing the skills of students from Kochi to write your name in kanji. Not bad. Students visiting Fairhaven have a message. Mata aimashou. Meet again. And Manjiro and the captain did, once more. His love and feeling of immense gratitude was always with him for the captain. It must have been quite an incredible meeting, exchanging stories.
In 1870, he was on a ship in New York that was heading for Europe with a delegation. Had 2 days free, jumped on a railroad, came back to Fairhaven, New Bedford for one night and spent that night with the captain at the farm.
Manjiro would have been 43, a distinguished diplomat from Japan. The captain, age 66, would have been immensely proud of him. Manjiro was reprimanded by the Japanese government for making this trip. Captain Whitfield died on February 11, 1886, age 81. Japanese from Tosa Shimizu visit the grave to pay respects for taking in one from their town so long ago. The kindness and love is never forgotten. It's sad to leave like Manjiro did in 1849, but we know they'll be back again.
John Manjiro, we can learn a lot from John Manjiro and Whitfield, Captain Whitfield relationship, because he taught us and the John Man spirit. It means never give up, never surrender, and be nice to other people.
The story is inspirational for so many reasons. This evening, a Japanese student from Tosa Shimizu got up and bravely spoke in English about what Manjiro means to her. Manjiro's story has a strong message to everyone who hears it, studies it. His mother died in 1879 at age 86. Manjiro continued teaching and translating until his own death in 1898 at age 71. He rests in Tokyo's Zoshigaya Cemetery near Ikebukuro. I visited to pay my respects. An introducer of American cultures, first Japanese who went over to the USA, among many, many other things.
I spent about a year producing this episode, going to places I'd never visited before, It was an adventure in itself to produce it, and one of the things that left the biggest impression on me were how the descendants of Manjiro and the captain, the Nakahamas and the Whitfields, keep in touch even today through the generations. The second generation of the Nakahama family presenting a samurai sword to the city of Fairhaven over the years, keeping in touch by writing, joining now at the Manjiro festival. It's a really beautiful thing because had the captain not been the one to discover Manjiro on that island in 1841, would there even be a Nakahama family? There's an amazing sense of gratitude there, as well as love from the Whitfield family, and that connection is so real. And that really connected the story for me from 1841 to the 2020s and beyond, the way that these families are still together, because it really was fate. Imagine how if Manjiro had returned back to Usa to his mother after fishing and there was no storm, what would his life have been like then? Or if he had just drifted along the Pacific going to Alaska, or maybe never being discovered at all? Or had it been another captain or another ship that had discovered the castaways on Torishima, what would their life have been like then? Knowing how impactful that it was, that because he was the only person who had observations or knowledge firsthand of the United States, and the only person who could speak English at the time, you know, he was a very important person to Japan. For the Japanese side of things, I think it was the boldness, the daringness to come back to Japan, to see his mother again. He would have been executed for coming back to Japan. That was just the policy at the time, and he knew this. So his intelligence to come through Ryukyu is just a genius thing, and he had been there before, so you'd imagine he was planning how to get back to see his mother, knowing the dangers of returning to Japan, and he never gave up on that. That's such an inspirational part of this story. To many Japanese, because he was the first English-speaking Japanese person, because he had studied in the United States, he's also something of a patron saint of eikaiwa, which is English conversation here. An interesting footnote that I learned producing this. For me, it's his ability to bridge the Japan with the United States. He had roots in both countries, similar to the way that I do, and the way that I observe things here in Japan and share that with you through this series. That really left a deep connection with Manjiro for me. We're coming up on the 200th birthday of Manjiro, and I think you'd be very surprised to know that he's very relevant today. In 1987, the Emperor made a trip to Fairhaven. He's in discussions all the time, his name coming up quite a bit, even more so as the legend of Manjiro grows. He was the start of the America-Japan relationship, the roots on both sides, bringing the two countries together when Commodore Perry came in. I honestly believe that his impact was a lot greater than the history books give him credit for. Being behind the scenes was a very smart thing back then. You never really wanted to be out in front. And with the chaos that was going on with the shogunate at the time, the shogun had died after Perry's first visit, and when Perry returned, there was a new shogun. So there was something of chaos in the Edo period at the time. So having somebody like Manjiro with first-hand knowledge of America, the only one, I think that left a huge impression on the shogunate's council at the time and the direction of modern Japan, which is huge. If you liked it, hit that subscribe button and join me in another adventure as I take it every corner of this amazing country. Mata ne.